On this tutorial, I'll be providing some tips for creating effective one-pagers. So why are we even talking about one-pagers? Let's take a step back and talk about communication in public health. It's always important to provide clear, concise messaging when you're communicating health science information. Tailoring your message to a specific audience is also important as it can help increase awareness about an issue, and it's also effective when you're working to drive a behavior change or a specific action related to an issue. It's also important to note that people may not have the resources, whether that be time or the expertise, to do extensive research on their own, or they may not even be able to digest and understand all the evidence that they come across. So providing clear, concise messaging and tailoring that messaging can address inequities in accessing information. All of this brings us to why one-pagers are important. They're an effective communication tool in public health. So what's a one-pager? A one-pager is a tool to deliver information, and it can also be a call to action in a concise, visually appealing format. It can also be a valuable advocacy tool when engaging with policymakers. A one-pager can allow you to tailor your message to a specific audience, and it's also important to research that audience in advance. It can also allow you to share specific information and/or craft a specific ask to your audience. Overall, one-pagers can influence community members, partners, and even policymakers on important topics. So in a moment, we are going to go step by step through the process, but I wanted to start out by showing you where we will end up. This example one-pager is one that I created during my MPH program. The organization name and some of the information within this one-pager is fictional. I will also note that while this one-pager is meant as a policy advocacy tool, the Region 5 Public Health Training Center is not lobbying for the piece of legislation referenced in the one-pager. And as a side note, while advocacy and lobbying are similar and can overlap, the main difference is advocacy tends to be broad support for or against an issue, while lobbying is the more specific support for or against a particular piece of legislation, candidate, political party, etc. For more information on advocacy and lobbying, please check out our self-paced training on advocacy communications for policy, systems, and environmental change, which you will find at rvphtc.org. With that said, using this one-pager will be helpful as we go through step-by-step how to craft this helpful communication tool. The first step in creating our one-pager is crafting our title sentence. The title and the title sentence will both go at the top of the page and will indicate who you are. You will also include information to cue the audience about the purpose of the one-pager and, if applicable, what the specific ask is of the audience. And for this part, you want to make sure that you know your audience in advance of beginning this process. Remember that the title should be interesting, but also understandable, explaining what is about to be covered. So in our example one-pager, the issue is that the U.S. lacks funding infrastructure to address prolonged crisis situations, and we're asking for Congress to pass legislation to add funding specifically for emergency preparedness and emerging threats. The title of our one-pager, which will go up at the top, is Emerging Threats Funding Expansion. And right underneath that is where the title sentence will go. The title sentence here is, the CHASS Policy Initiatives team urges you to support the reintroduction and passage of H.R. 1943 with a new Emerging Threats Funding Expansion Amendment to add $1 billion annually specifically for emergency preparedness funding to be signed into law by October 1st, 2020. So in our title sentence, we indicate who we are in the beginning, our purpose, and our specific ask of the audience. The audience in this case is policymakers. The next step in the process is to work on the background section. In the background section, you describe what the issue or problem is and why it's important to address it. You also want to make sure to lay out the evidence using examples and statistics to motivate towards action. In our example, the problem is that existing funds are insufficient to support operations and the growing demand of community health centers, especially in the wake of emerging threats. We then wanted to explicitly outline why our audience should care. So our first point here is that community health centers, abbreviated as CHCs, have insufficient long-term funds, and this poses a significant risk to millions of vulnerable and underserved patients across the country. Our second point is that as the elderly population grows, the demand for primary care for chronic diseases will increase, and the cost of recruiting and training healthcare providers will also rise. Our third and final point includes a statistic. According to the National Association of Community Health Centers, CHCs are at the forefront of addressing public health crises and need to establish a complete system and adequate measures in advance to meet the needs of emergencies. The next step is to work on your information or solution section. This section will contain the bulk of your information and will really get at what should be done. Here you also want to answer why. Why is the information that you're providing to the audience appropriate? Be sure to describe key takeaways and the intended impact, outline next steps if applicable, and include contact information and/or link to resources if they are available. So in our example, we are asking our audience, which is policymakers, to reintroduce and support H.R. 1943 with a new Emerging Threats Funding Expansion Amendment to secure $1 billion annually, specifically for emergency preparedness to the CHC Fund. In this example, the information here directly ties back to what we shared in our title sentence. We also explain why the ask is what it is. We must prepare community health centers against the next emerging threat in order to prevent the unnecessary loss of human life and to provide a safe place for community members. And lastly, we outlined what our key takeaway is. Adequate funding is a vital protective measure that will best equip CHCs against the next emerging public health threat. The last step in the process is to include visual elements. While there are a lot of points listed here, all of them will help the reader to best understand the information that you're presenting. Use images and logos when you can. Data visualizations, like graphs and charts, can also help break up the text and convey key information in an easy-to-read format. You don't want to fill the entire page with text and visuals, so be sure to leave a little bit of blank space. You can use headings with large font and sections to organize your key points. Differentiating text is also helpful. Bolding, using all caps, and underlining points that you want to emphasize is a good practice. Use bullet points instead of paragraphs or long sentences. Use lay language because most likely your audience are not experts in public health. Spell out acronyms, avoid jargon, and define specialty terms. When including statistics, do not use long citations. Saying something like, according to the CDC, should be sufficient, and avoid too many citations. In the example one-pager, we included this data visualization to drive home our message. So now we're going to look at a couple of examples. So here we are back at our example one-pager. Here we have zoomed in to our title and our title sentence. Notice how this section is clearly distinct from the rest of the one-pager. Here, we're zooming in on the background section. We have this broken down to our problem statement and also our points on why our audience should care. We broke up these bullet points by putting a couple different icons and also by changing the color of the text. For the information or solution section, we kept things pretty concise, but we still outlined the what and also the why, the reason why they should follow our guidance. At the bottom of our one-pager, we included a data visualization and the source, and also noted our key takeaway in a visually appealing way. There is a lot of variety in one-pagers out there, so I'll briefly go through another example. This one-pager from the National Association of Regional Councils is on water infrastructure, and we clearly see that with the information at the top. Here we have an entire title section, so a series of sentences that provide more information on the issue. We have our background section in the middle, and at the bottom we have our information or solution section. Also, statistics are clearly presented without using long citations. In terms of visual elements, while there are no data visualizations included on this one-pager, we still have some other good components put into place. There's a good amount of white space, there is differentiation of the text, and we have a couple icons and images to break up the text as well. So now that your one-pager is done, you need to prepare to share it out. Create a dissemination plan, utilize your network and leverage existing partnerships, and also ask before sharing. We hope the information provided in this tutorial will help you craft effective one-pagers.